Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 107. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. This week we're talking to the company Pentixapharm, which is about to be spun off from the Eckert and Ziegler Group, and we'll be talking about its pipeline and its recent acquisition of the target discovery business of Glycotope. Pentixapharm is a clinical stage biotech company discovering and developing novel targeted radiopharmaceuticals against a range of diseases. To tell us about the company and its work is Andreas Eckert, founder and chairman of the supervisory board at Pentixapharm. Okay, so I guess if we could get started with a bit of information on the upcoming spin-out of Pentixapharm.
Yeah, Pentixapharm is currently a subsidiary of Eckert Ziegler, and Eckert Ziegler is a company which provides other pharmaceutical companies with radioisotopes. It always held subsidiaries, startups, has always funded and supported startups, because Eckert Ziegler sees most of these things earlier than Novartis or Bayer, because the academicians or the inventors come to us when they need a lab and they need to play around with the mice. And that led to Eckert Ziegler always funding these guys. And Pentixapharm is in a way has the same background. But Pentixapharm is a company where success was more than anticipated. Pentixapharm works on the CXCR4 receptor. And that receptor has been thoroughly researched, you could say, by a lot of academicians, and not just researched, but it had been also tested. There were more, when we got hands on the asset there, more than 1,000 patients had already been treated under compassionate use programs or similar things like that. And the management just said, well, let's tabulate all these kind of things, put them together and go to the registrator and ask them, do we really need to start with the mice and then with the volunteers and all that thing? Can we not right away jump in a phase 3? And the EMEA said yes. And that leads to the spin-off, because Eckert Ziegler, as a provider of radiopharmaceuticals, does not want to compete with its customers. It's a strategic dilemma you have if you want to sell radioisotopes to the industry, be it actinium or be it other things. You don't want to have a little portfolio on the side where you have pretty much target similar things as the pharma customers that you have. So that led to the decision about a year ago to separate, to do a spin-off. And I'm the founder, long-time chairman, long-time CEO and chairman of Eckert Ziegler, and I was entrusted together with Hakim, my CEO there, to lead this transition or this spin-off. And that's where we are currently.
So what would be in Pentixapharm's existing pipeline before we get to talking about the Glycotope transaction?
Yeah, the Pentixapharm pipeline is focused around the CXCR4 receptor. It has a global rights to use this receptor as a target for radiopharmaceuticals. And that leads itself to two types, therapeutics and diagnostics. And on the diagnostic side, Pentixapharm, to some extent by surprise, is in a situation whereby it has the green light and actually an open phase 3 trial in Europe with the EMA. And we had a type C meeting with the FDA recently, and they gave us green light to do the same compound, go with that in the United States in a different indication. So we have two phase 3 assets there as an advanced clinical asset, and we're going to go, of course, with these assets because, as you know, pharmaceutical development is the Iron Man of product development. It takes years and costs money. But if you have a phase 3 asset, you can pretty much calculate that within 2 or 3 years, you should be able to reach the promised land of market access or market entry. And in the diagnostics, it's even more favorable because nuclear diagnostics, you've seen the pictures, you've seen them in phase 2, phase 1, and so it's unlikely the mode of action is understood. It's unlikely that you will fail. So Pentixa has these two assets in a really interesting indication. It also has a therapeutics, the same ligand, the CXCR4, and it turns out that is an excellent target for a whole range of hemato-oncological indications. And Pentixapharm is developing that. It has started and initiated and is open now a phase 1/2A trial where we do dose finding, and we will go the usual path with that, use the diagnostic as a companion diagnostic for the therapeutic. and are pretty optimistic that this is also a very attractive compound because there isn't much really in radiopharmaceuticals or in general for people who suffer from leukemias or myelomas.
Could you explain a little bit about the CXCR4 ligand approach?
Yeah, the ligand appears on a broad range of malignancies, is highly specific, and in the hemato-oncological or hematopoietic system, it is overexpressed on the blood cells. It's an ideal target because when you go there with a radioisotope, you pretty much wipe out almost all of your tumor cells. And in the context of hemato-oncological indications, you would also, in any case, have a replacement of your bone marrow. It works double that it does the carving out at the same step as it does the killing of the cancer cells.
And could you tell me a bit about the development plans for your lead compound in primary aldosteronism?
Yeah, I love it because it's an exciting little thing. You know, what excited us about the CXCR4 is that we're taking a completely new territory. We're going after hypertension. Now, the story is a little complex. Hypertension needs a few explanations, but it basically goes like that. One major cause of hypertension is a malfunctioning of the adrenal glands. They oversecrete aldosterone, and that gives you all the problem, blood pressure raises, and then the follow-on diseases, which you know, it's heart attacks and all these, by factor 2 or 3, these people suffer from that. Now, if your glands, your adrenal glands malfunction, you can belong to one or two groups, the lucky one and the unlucky one. The lucky one, it's just one gland malfunctioning. The other one is completely normal. And in this case, a surgeon could, with a small operation, take out one gland or ablate it, the little knots which secrete the aldosterone, and the other one or the remaining one would pretty much take over and you would go back to complete biomedical normalization. This is not really used at the moment, although you could use it on a large number of hypertension patients, because it's so very difficult not to see whether you have a higher level of aldosterone, but whether you have a unilateral or a bilateral case of primary hyperaldosteronism. Unilateral, just one. Bilateral, both glands are affected. And the only way, the gold standard to find out whether one or two glands are affected today is a biopsy, which is called adrenal vein sample. They have to take a catheter, you go in the kidney, you go around the curve, you have to take a little sample here, take the whole thing out, go in the other kidney, around the curve into the other gland, take another sample and measure the gradient. If one is 8 and one is 2, then you have a unilateral case. If one is 2 and one is 2, then you may have a bilateral one. It could be 8 and 8. The fact is, you need the guy or the girl with the golden hands to do these kind of biopsy, and that's a real bottleneck. So endocrinologists don't have a way to do as many of these diagnostics as they want. There are long waiting lists, and basically our new compound promises to substitute that by a simple PET scan. So that's what makes it exciting. Exciting is that you have a real high dark field in this area. If you look at the statistics on hypertension and how much is related to PA, it's not so much. If you talk to people who are at special treatment centers who treat therapy-resistant hypertension patients, they say truckloads of patients, and the estimates run as high between 3 and 15 million scans would be advisable in US and Europe.
Is it quick and cheap?
Yes, you're getting at the point. The quick and cheap. Quick, definitely. It's an injection. The patient comes there, you get injected, you wait for half an hour until the thing distributes in your body, and then you get into the normal PET scanner, and they go you out, and then you have the picture, and you can say, is it unilateral? Does it warrant an operation, or are you the unlucky one, and you have to continue to take all kind of medication your lifelong, which has still serious side effects. So there is no easy medication. Cheap, yes, that's a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing if you talk about providers and payers. Of course, if you talk about investors and you talk pharma scenes, the current image of a diagnostic is something, it's kind of money, it's stuff with whom you can't make money. But that is not true. If you look at Lantheus, for example, here in the last 2 or 3 years, they've built from scratch, from 8 million in Q3 2021, Pylarify into something which has now in the US just revenues and more than $1 billion. And that is without even taking into account Telex and all the other ones who are also providing for that, and European sales on that. And we see a clear trend to use nuclear diagnostics to widen them out. And in a way, it works for us if you have a large indication like hypertension, where you can provide an essential benefit to the patient. There will be a willingness of payers also to support it. And we are fine if these things are not 100,000 euros, dollars a treatment cost per year. The volume will make the thing attractive.
Right. And I guess any time that you start to talk about economics, it's a little bit difficult because there are so many factors involved. There's insurance and how many people that you can help and savings with future treatment and that kind of thing. So it's a much bigger picture than it at first could seem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it makes it exciting because it also, one can always think pessimistic. Yeah? It's very small. It's this kind of niche diagnostics nobody wants. It won't be like that. If you look at the economics, it's much cheaper to do a scan. Now you have an operation with the operating suite, and it's an invasive procedure, and you have all kind of patient has to go off medications, all these kind of things to do that. In terms of cost, it definitely beats the biopsy. In terms of OSHA rules, actually it's two, because radiologists who have to do the procedure, they have to do it in a CT. So you save exposure there. It's an interesting case insofar, if you talk US environment, that hypertension is de facto much more prevalent in minorities. Although we don't seem to think of it, hypertension is a disease which affects these subgroups much more. And if you add all of that, it actually makes a very interesting case.
Could you tell me a little bit about Glycotope's operations and pipeline and glyco targets?
Well, Glycotope, I'm the founder, I'm one of the co-founders of Glycotope. In 2004, we founded it. And then when in Germany the capital market crashed after the Neue Markt, we had to look for different finances and went to Thomas Strungmann and the Athos Group, which is a financier behind, among others, biotech. And we developed together Glycotope there on the idea that the glycosylation of proteins has a pharmacokinetic effect. It turned out that the effect is not as large as we hoped, but we only found out after we burned almost $200 million. And since then, Glycotope has changed its business model into developing very specific antibodies and licensing out to pharma companies who would then link to that a toxin or use it for immunological concepts. The naked antibody is never the thing itself. They would add something. So we have a deal with Daiichi, which is working on antibodies there. The problem with Glycotope has been that the business of licensing out naked antibodies is a hard one. You have to license out, they have to work on it a couple of years on that. The feedback isn't anymore there, so the decision was on the Glycotope partners to change the business model. And that opened an opportunity for Pentixa, who now does not want to sell anybody a license for an antibody, but they would also for its own pipeline of radiotherapeutics. There's a group of people who know a lot about selecting targets with a high sensitivity, with low cross-reactivities, with highly specific and all these things. And we just took the opportunity to take the team in there and, if you say from a standalone profit center, which it was in Glycotope, it becomes a cost center in the development department. And it will help us to go beyond CXCR4 into the next generation. The beauty of it is that the know-how which we have up here is not limited to oncological target, but to a whole range of other ones. We like the idea that to extend radiopharmaceuticals to other indications, there's a lot of precedents where it works, for example, very nicely in rheumatoid arthritis and these kind of things. There's a long tradition of treating that. So the people which came from Glycotope are now helping us to fill, if you want, the pipeline.
How synergistic were those two businesses?
As synergistic as we have the CXCR4 is a small molecule, peptide. If you want, antibody are animals in itself, you have to all this run. So on the technical side, currently there are not many synergies, but the Pentixa team has all the know-how of chelating vehicles, which you do. It has a lot of experience with radioisotopes and radioisotope supply chains and the labs, and the synergy comes there.
And I'm not sure how much detail you can go into on the acquisition itself, but was that the entire company or just a portion of the company?
It's a good part of the technical people, and we also were lucky that the change of the business model there led to that we have there was an administrative core. which due to the fact that Glycotope was a large company, included an SAP system. And for a smaller startup like Pentixapharm, that's perfect, because if we go for and become a public company, the requirements which you have up there are much larger than the requirements that you have if you're private. It's a win-win for both companies, and they're close in proximity. We can make the facility. They're all on the same campus here in Berlin. Couldn't have been worked better.
Will out-licensing still be a major feature, given Glycotope's previous work, or do you plan on doing your own clinical trials?
We do our own clinical trials. The key for Pentixapharm is the clinical team in radiopharmaceutical. I also think that in terms of the enormous amount of money which has been pouring into the radiopharmaceutical space in the last years, and it's in VC money, and you've seen the deals when large corporations stepped in. Novartis has bought, Eli Lilly has bought. Everybody is in there, and it's billion-dollar deals. That will lead somewhere down the road. It will consolidate the industry, and then they all will look for pipeline. They will all look for content. So we're going to focus Pentixa on that. We'd be very unlikely to have 50 sales guys out there in Scotland or anywhere. It's a research focused, it's clinical team and research. That will be the focus.
So how do you see the future for Pentixapharm and your new increased portfolio?
Oh, I see the future is bright, like always. We will look at the spinout, organize that. We have to go through all kinds of commotions, the regulations, the the German SEC, the tralala here and there. And what we do, we had as the last milestone, we had the approval of the spin-off by the shareholder meeting of Eckert Ziegler. We go and when we will push it in there, and actually we are the masters of our destiny, because a spin-off is different than a full-fledged IPO. Any shareholder of Eckert & Ziegler one morning should wake up and have a second share of a different company in the portfolio. We'll push that ahead, and then Pentixa will have to show. The phase 3 things, that will take 2 or 3 years, but the capital markets will watch. Yeah, can they deliver? I'm optimistic they will deliver. By then we have the phase 2 data from the therapeutic, and we'll hopefully be able to commence a phase 2b. That would give us the pivotal data on, does it really as a therapeutic have meaningful clinical endpoint? Does it increase survival or other things like that? And if you have these data, that's most likely the injunction point where we would look for deals. And by then I also hope that the pipeline of these antibody and the glycotopes guys, they have a whole firework of interesting targets.
Definitely an interesting company doing some very exciting work in the radiopharmaceuticals field. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.